Utah, home to more than 81,000 miles of rivers and streams, many which hold fish. Most of the fish in our state have been introduced and are not native, which has endangered our native cutthroat trout. Wild cutthroat are the only native trout to the state of Utah. The Cutthroat Slam is a program designed to raise money to protect these native wild cutthroat. The Bonneville Cutthroat, the Bear River Cutthroat, the Colorado River Cutthroat, and the Yellowstone Cutthroat are the 4 native subspecies to our state. Join Skiddy Fishing in this 4-part limited narrative series where I drive all over the state and catch these 4 subspecies. This donation will go to conservation projects and earn a medallion. I hope you enjoy the Cutthroat Slam. The Uinta-Wasatch Cache National Forest is home to 2.2 million acres and the beginning of the journey where most of us will take our Utah Cutthroat Slam adventure. It has been just over 7 months since I ventured up to the Raft River Mountains to catch the infamous Yellowstone cutthroat, which is a really nice fish to get out of the way, considering it's the hardest one of the 4 indigenous species of cutthroat trout in Utah. Yes. Although there is no expiration date for the Utah Cutthroat Slam and you may take as long as you would like to complete the challenge, I chose to wait the next 7 months to get winter over with as it's hard to reach most places. And so the new season of spring had dawned on us, and as the snow turned to water and water filled up the reservoirs, the rivers had become full-blown spring runoff. Now lurking in these high-flow, murky waters is possibly Utah's most important cutthroat trout, and one that was thought to be extinct when it came to pure strain populations. A cutthroat trout with fading spots, rosy opal cheeks, and possibly the greatest comeback story of all time. You may just know it as the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout. Now, as I approach the bank to take my first few casts, I'm delighted to see that there are hatches happening everywhere. Not only are there plenty of flying insects, but there are bugs underneath rocks as always, including some stoneflies. There's terrestrials on the land such as red ants and black ants, and there's very, very large stoneflies or salmon flies flying around very clumsy-like. Because of the fast flows and the high water, I'm going to be pairing this 4-weight western fly rod with a beaded nymph to get down deep, and after a few casts on the very next run upstream, I'm finally granted my first fish of the day, a Bonneville Cutthroat Trout. Admiring the trout for a few seconds in the net, I wet my hands and I ensure that I get the hook out right before releasing it back into the water. Although creeks of this size typically produce smaller 6 to 7 inch trout, every once in a while you may just hook into a 16-inch trout. Completely unaware and unprepared for that fish to take my fly, I quickly get myself into a composed state trying to get the fish to the net, which was missed initially at first. No matter, I didn't lose any hope and I focused on getting it to the net.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
It's probably safe to assume I was pretty excited about that catch, and with wet hands and a wet fish, I quickly show it up to the camera here to demonstrate the 16-inch Bonneville Cutthroat Trout, and then once again wet my hands as I release it back into the water. Although this water is very cold to the touch from the mountain runoff, it's a good practice to not leave a trout out of the net for too long and get him back into the water and released as soon as possible. Although I had fished the lower bounds of this river before, I'd never known it to hold cutthroat trout, so using the Utah Cutthroat Slam interactive map, I figured out exactly what section they were likely holding up in. It didn't take long for me to figure out there was an even bigger cutthroat trout upstream. This one was likely about 17 inches and sipping on some small dry flies. After looking at my dry fly box for a few minutes, the smallest fly I had was an elk hair caddis. It took me quite a few casts to get the perfect presentation. Just like the last fish, I missed it at the net a second time. This one was a little bit more intimidating given the amount of splashing this trout was doing on me. And like all good days of fishing, it was total deja vu, and once again, I was completely ecstatic that I just caught that trout. That just happened to be a new personal best on that particular fly rod. I focused up and got the trout back in the water, took a few pictures for the Utah Cutthroat Slam, and released this majestic native trout. After moving up and down the creek for a couple of hours, I noticed some spawning trout in a shallow riverbed, and that's when I decided to end my journey for the day. Unlike the ever so popular brown trout, which typically spawns in late fall, the cutthroat trout always spawn in the spring. This will start when the spring runoff comes down to a controlled flow, and the trout can spawn in shallow, gravelly water where they'll make their reds. This can last from late spring to the second week of July. If you happen to live in the Beehive State, the chances are the most accessible native trout to you are the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout. They are the most widely distributed in the state and the most native, therefore making them the easiest to target in the Utah Cutthroat Slam. Sadly, it wasn't always this way, though. When the pioneers came out west and settled in Utah, the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout was an abundant food source for Native American folk and settlers alike. And many years later, when Utah became the 45th state in the Union, settlers introduced non-native trout such as the rainbow, brook, and brown trout for other angler opportunities. These non-native trout had quickly outcompeted and outnumbered the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout in native streams. It was widely unknown that the integration of rainbow trout would share the same spawning cycles as cutthroat trout, therefore natural hybridization had happened, altering the genetic purity of the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout. With the overharvesting of native trout, the introduction of non-native trout, and the never-ending need of water in the desert, Utah had been a state for less than 100 years before they believed that pure strain populations of Bonneville Cutthroat Trout were extinct. However, even with all the tragedies that struck the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout, by the 1970s, 6 pure strain populations had been discovered and a massive statewide conservation had been followed. With multiple governing agencies, including the Goshute Tribe, the Utah Department of Wildlife, and the federal government, the conservation efforts had brought back the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout from the brink of extinction, and by 1997, the Bonneville Cutthroat had become the state fish of Utah, replacing the non-native rainbow trout. And with continued conservation efforts, with millions of dollars donated from the Western Native Trout Initiative and the Utah Cutthroat Slam, anglers can now enjoy these native precious gems of Utah, the Bonneville Cutthroat Trout, more than ever before.